Okay, hey everybody. We're back with, or I'm back with another episode of The Bitter Pill. I think this is episode 6, and I had other plans for this episode originally, but then shit happened yesterday with uh, the U.S. Attack in Iraq, so I thought I would make a quick video about uh, this possible new war uh, with Iran and just take a look at what some notable political figures in the U.S. have said about it, and gonna kind of wing it today, go without a script, so we'll see how this goes. And if you like the video, please like and subscribe, and maybe chip in a few dollars at the Patreon. Anyway, uh, so Muno, Alabama, which is a website I kind of like, although I don't visit it that often, had this to say about the U.S. attack that took place in Baghdad last night. U.S. will come to regret its assassination of Quassim Soulemani. I guess that's how you say his name. Today, the U.S. declared war on Iran and Iraq. War is what it will get. Earlier today, a U.S. drone or helicopter killed Major General Quassim Soulemani, the famous commander of the Iranian Quds force, while he left the airport of Baghdad, where he had just arrived. He had planned to attend the funeral of the 31 Iraqi soldiers that the U.S. had killed on December 29th at the Syrian-Iraq border near Al-Qaim. There's been much outrage among some, particularly supporters of Donald Trump, about the storming of the U.S. embassy by people in Iraq, and they claimed that somehow that event justified the assassination of an Iranian as well as Iraqi leader, as well as innocent people standing by. But again, the original incident that set this all off was the U.S. killing of 31 Iraqi soldiers prior to that. So anyway, they go on to say, the Quds Force is the external arm of the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. Soleimani was responsible for all relations between Iran and political and militant movements outside of Iran. Qassim advised the Lebanese Hezbollah during the 2006 war against Israel. His support for Iraqi groups enabled him to kick the U.S. invaders out of Iraq. He was a man responsible for and successful in defeating the Islamic State, ISIS, that is, in Iraq and Syria. In 2015, he traveled to Moscow and convinced Russia to intervene in Syria. His support for the Houthi in Yemen enabled them to withstand the Saudi attackers. As you may know, the U.S. and Saudi Arabia are allied with each other in a horrific war in Yemen by the Houthis against the Houthi. Soleimani had arrived in Baghdad on a flight from Lebanon. He didn't travel in secret. He was picked up at the airport by Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, the deputy commander of an Iraqi security force under the command of the prime minister. So, official Iraqi government car picked them up, and the U.S. is supposedly in an alliance with the Iraqi government. Troops stationed in Iraq with the permission of the Iraqi government, and yet the U.S. attacks Iraqi government vehicles. So the two cars they traveled in were destroyed in the U.S. attack. Both men and their drivers and guards died. So the U.S. created two martyrs, essentially, who will now become the models and idols for tens of millions of youth in the Middle East, because these two individuals were extremely popular in Iraq and Iran and other places in the Middle East. Let's see. So various forces throughout the Middle East fighting against ISIS benefited from Souleimani's advice and support. The outright assassination of a commander of Soleimani's weight demands an Iranian reaction of at least a similar size. All U.S. generals or high politicians traveling in the Middle East or elsewhere will now have to watch their back. There will be no safety for them anywhere. No Iraqi politician will be able to argue for keeping U.S. forces in the country. I wonder if that's something Trump thought of. The Iraqi Prime Minister has called for a parliamentary meeting to ask for the withdrawal of all U.S. troops. And he said, the targeted assassination of an Iraqi commander is a violation of the agreement. It can trigger a war in Iraq and the region. It is a clear violation of the conditions of the U.S. presence in Iraq. I call on the Parliament to take the necessary steps, i.e., call on the U.S. to withdraw its troops from Iraq. The National Security Council of Iran is meeting with Supreme Leader Khamenei to study the options of response. There are many such options. The U.S. has forces stationed in many countries around Iran. From now on, none of them will be safe. And just to kind of give you a picture of the magnitude of this event, Soleimani was, and I personally, I'd never heard of him until yesterday, but in Iran, he is extremely famous. He is one of the very most popular public figures in all of Iraq, and Iran, and considered the second most powerful person in Iran. So it would, saying it's analogous to if Iran assassinated Mike Pence doesn't even do it justice. It's a bigger event than that in the eyes of the Iranian people. And it's similarly of great magnitude in Iraq that the Iraqi military commander was killed. So, U.S. President Donald Trump will go into his re-election campaign with U.S. troops under threat everywhere. We can expect incidents like the Beirut barracks bombing to repeat themselves when he is most vulnerable. Trump will learn that killing the enemy is the easy part of a war. The difficulties come after that happened. Let's see. The U.S. has won nothing with its attack, but will feel the consequences for decades to come. From now on, its position in the Middle East will be severely constrained. Others will move in to take its place. That's not to speak of the possibility that this could spark a major war. But even that aside, even if you're just like you're one of the totally self-centered pricks who runs our government. Even from that perspective, it was a stupid thing to do. It will have very negative consequences for the U.S.'s position in the Middle East. So let's look at some reactions from various folks. One of the first people to say anything was Bernie Sanders. He had a pretty good statement about this. He said Trump's dangerous escalation brings us closer to another disastrous war in the Middle East that could cause countless lives and trillions more dollars. Trump promised to end endless wars, but this action puts us on the path to another one. So this is a good statement. There's no equivocation or anything there. He just flat out says this is a very dangerous tack that he's taken that breaks his campaign promises and puts us on a path to war that could be very, very, very destructive and costly. Max Blumenthal, well-known political commentator, pointed this out. I'm sorry. This is on Max Blumenthal's post, but let me read you what. Oh, okay. Let's look at this first. So Chris Murphy, U.S. Senator from Connecticut, and all around douchebag. He's liberal Democrats. Has taken good stands on some issues, but he's a warmonger for the most part. And to give you an idea of why, that's the amount of money he's received during his time in the Senate from United Technologies, a major defense contractor. And I'm sure that's not the only one. So anyway, Murphy says, and this is what you hear from almost all the politicians who've commented, although not Bernie Sanders, as we just saw. Soleimani was an enemy of the United States. That's not a question. The question is this: as the report suggests, did America just assassinate? Well, yeah, they did, Chris. It's not a question. Without any congressional authorization, the second most powerful person in Iran, knowingly setting off a potential massive regional war. Well, I mean, that's a good question. So there are some good things about his statement. But YouTube commentator and author Max Blumenthal had this to say. He was an enemy of ISIS who interrupted imperial plans to destabilize Syria. At what point did he or his forces threaten the national security of the U.S.? This is how congressional Dems feed into Trump and Netanyahu's narrative. And as you might imagine, if you know who Benjamin Netanyahu, the outgoing prime minister of Israel, is, naturally he supports Trump's bombing of or attack on the Iraqi and Iranian military leaders. Let's see, what else we got here? Let's take a look at Jill Stein, former presidential candidate for the Green Party back in 2012 and 2016. Trump just poured gasoline on the fires of U.S. empire with killing of Iran's Revolutionary Guard commander. This follows airstrikes killing 25, outraging Iraqis, and that's something that generally gets left out of discussion or commentary by politicians in Congress. Is obviously when several dozens of your countrymen are killed without provocation, you're going to be outraged. Outraging Iraqis, inciting standoff at the embassy. Bigger than ever, bipartisan military budget is fanning the flames of the unthinkable. U.S. out of Iraq. So she alludes there to the recent military budget of $738 billion that was passed with overwhelming bipartisan support in both houses of Congress. There were 188 votes in the House of Representatives by Democrats for this bill. Only, I think it was 41 opposed. And this was like 2 days before the vote for impeachment. So they gave Trump this unimaginably big military budget, just colossally larger than any other country's military budget by a factor of several times. That included stripping the bill of provisions such as a provision that would have introduced by Tulsi Gabbard that would have required Trump to seek congressional authorization before he did things like what he just did. But this was deleted out of the bill. Let's see. So Ilhan Omar, one of the squad, had a pretty good comment. So what if Trump wants war, knows this leads to war, and needs a distraction? Real question is, will those with congressional authority step in and stop him? Uh, I know I will, but obviously the answer to Elon's question regarding most of her colleagues is no, they won't. So let's see. I haven't seen a statement yet from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and I don't. Well, I don't know. Let me just go look and see if she has said anything. Where are you, AOC? War is a class conflict to the rich and powerful who open war escape the consequences of their decisions. It's not their children sent into the jaws of violence. It is often the vulnerable, the poor, and working people who had little to no say in conflict who pay the price. And that's an excellent point, and a point that many have made to all people engaging in all the cheerleading of U.S. warmongering is, well, if you're so enthusiastic about it, why don't you go? Um, but of course, hardly any of them do so. Let's see. She mentions also that Congress now has a moral and legal obligation to reassert its power to stop this war and protect innocent people from horrific consequences. We have two immediate options. One, vote on a war powers resolution, which requires Trump to obtain, I guess she meant, congressional approval. Two, reintroduce and vote on Representative Ro Khanna's bipartisan uh, National Defense Authorization Act agreement, which blocks money for offensive action in Iran. The amendment passed the House with bipartisan support not long ago and was later gutted in negotiations. We can bring it back as a standalone bill. So those are two very good ideas. And as she points out, uh, any act of war requires the approval of Congress. That's in the Constitution. Um, so, uh, you know, that's a way that Congress could act. We'll see whether they do. Seems doubtful. Let's see. Jamu Buraka, who was Jill Stein's vice presidential candidate last election, said the Democrats collaborated with Trump to remove the restriction on waging war on Iran. That was part of the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, military spending bill, recently passed by Congress that gave Trump everything he wanted, including another record increase in military spending. The possible war with Iran is the result. Um, so, so that's a really important point to keep in mind here is that although some of the Democrats are speaking out against this and taking steps to take some sort of action to stop this, we have to remember that the majority of the Democrats have been complicit in this because they voted for the military budget and acted in various other ways legislatively to make it possible for Trump to basically do what he wanted because they, of course, have the power constitutionally to stop him, but they have not. And as Nicole Alexander Fisher, a, uh, a writer whose work appears in Forbes and other publications, who's, I believe, a Tulsi Gabbard supporter, points out that there were just a handful of people, almost all Democrats, who voted against the war budget. and that it contained a resolution that would have specifically prevented unauthorized war with Iran, but that resolution was ultimately stripped out in the final bill that was voted on. So I already mentioned Bernie Sanders' reaction to this, and other Democratic candidates for president, for the most part, with a couple of exceptions, said basically the same thing. No American will mourn Qassim Soleimani's passing. He deserved to be brought to justice for his crimes against American troops and thousands of innocents throughout the region. No mention about all the ISIS troops that he and his troops went after. He supported terror and sowed chaos. Okay, so now that we've got the important stuff out of the way, he goes on to say, none of that negates the fact that this is a hugely escalatory move in an already dangerous region. The administration's statement says that its goal is to deter future attacks by Iran, but this action almost certainly will have the opposite effects. Yada, yada, yada. We could be on the brink of a major conflict across the Middle East. I hope the administration has thought through the second and third order consequences of the path they have chosen. But I fear this administration has not demonstrated at any turn the discipline or long-term vision necessary, and the stakes could not be higher. So, some good things in the latter part of his statement. Michael Bloomberg, a little shorter but almost identical. Qassim Soulemani was a murderer with the blood of Americans on his hands, blah, blah, blah. But okay, now that we've got the main thing to think about out of the way, he was a bad guy. But given his track record and his history of making reckless and impulsive decisions that undermine U.S. strategic objectives and weaken our allies, he's talking about Trump there, most recently in Syria, there is every reason to be deeply concerned. It is imperative that the administration now de-escalate this crisis in order to prevent wider conflicts and protect American lives, because who gives a fuck about Iraqi or Iranian lives? And prevent Iran from escaping domestic pressure to reform its political and economic systems. So, no reform needed here in the good old US of A, because we're perfect. Cory Booker, a little shorter, basically the same thing. First, let's be clear. Soleimani has American blood on his hands. He's a bad, 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 bad guy. In fact, he actually says this is someone who is a bad person. But we also have to look at the larger strategic situation in that area. We have a president who has, not sure what he meant to say there. We have a president who has had a failure in his Iranian policy, who has had no larger strategic plan, and has made that region less stable and less safe. Mr. Vegan, doing a little equivocating there. Okay, Mayor Pete. Oh, this is a long one. The top priority of a commander-in-chief must be to protect Americans and our national security interests. There's no question that Qassim Soleimani was a threat to that safety and security, and that he masterminded threats and attacks on Americans and our allies, leading to hundreds of deaths. Other people said thousands. Not sure. Their memo must have had alternate copies, because some of them are saying hundreds and some thousands. But there are serious questions about how this decision was made and whether we were prepared for the consequences. As a former military intelligence officer on the ground who probably doesn't know jack shit about military strategy, I was trained to ask the hard questions before acting. A commander-in-chief must do the same. as commander-in-chief until yesterday, I guess, of a small town in Indiana. Um, I know what I'm talking about here. Um, Before engaging in military action that could destabilize an entire region, we must take a strategic, deliberate approach that includes consultation with Congress, our allies, and stakeholders in the Middle East. The lawful constitutional role of Congress in matters of war and peace must be respected. So, hey, as long as we have our Congress rubber stamp it, hey, Trump, go ahead. Now we must deal with the consequences of this action, beginning with the immediate and very real dangers to American citizens in and out of uniform in the Middle East. We must prepare for the impact on regional stability, complex forms of retaliation, and the potential for escalation into war, and possibly horrific consequences for citizens of Iraq and Iran. Oh, wait, it doesn't say that. Okay, so he says this must not be the start of another endless war. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. All right. I think I'll skip over John Delaney. Tulsi Gabbard. Just since May of last year alone, we've seen more than 15,000 U.S. troops, additional U.S. troops, being deployed across the Middle East. All these actions pushing us closer and closer to this war with Iran, and this step that he just took last night seriously escalated the situation. It's becoming more clear that our troops are really there to fight against Iran. Once again, a war that Congress has not authorized. That was in her appearance on Fox News this morning. Shoot, I don't think I have it here. I had a link to the video of her appearance on Fox, but anyway, let's see, where was it? There it is. But what I wanted to say further about what Tulsi said on Fox News was that she also, unfortunately, in my view, reiterated the talking point that I've heard from, that you've seen from all these other people about, Quassim Soulemani was an evil, bad dude, but we shouldn't be assassinating him. She actually did say it was an assassination in comments later today. On the other hand, she's been the most consistent voice in Congress, as well as on the campaign trail in her campaign for president, against U.S. intervention in Iraq. She's been outspoken in her opposition to Trump's constant saber rattling against Iraq for his entire term in office. Including being the person who the last 2 years has introduced resolutions, which unfortunately didn't get anywhere, advocating that Congress make a point of emphasizing that they have the power to declare war, and that Trump is not authorized to take action against Iran without congressional approval. She's definitely taken a good stand. I do think that her comments about Suleiman was unfortunate because, at least as far as I can tell, and mind you, I had not heard of him until yesterday either. But from my understanding, he's not just this evil bad dude or something. He was the leader in Iraq and to an extent in other countries such as Syria in the battle against ISIS, and he was actually quite successful at it, and that's why he's highly regarded in Iran and really throughout the Middle East. Not something that she needed to say, or the others either. Amy Klobuchar, Qassim Soleimani was responsible for directing Iran's destabilizing actions in Iraq, Syria, and throughout the Middle East. Or, as opposed to the stabilizing actions of ISIS and Al Qaeda and so forth, I suppose. The so-called moderate rebels in Syria and Iraq and elsewhere. Um, Including attacks on U.S. forces, but the timing, manner, and potential consequences of the administration's actions raise serious questions and concerns about an escalating conflict. Our immediate focus needs to be on ensuring all necessary security measures are taken to protect U.S. military and diplomatic personnel in Iraq and throughout the region. The administration needs to fully consult with Congress on its decision making, etc. So, yeah, I get the impression, and you may as well, that Pelosi or Schumer or somebody sent out a memo to members of Congress, giving them the same damn talking points that we basically see various iterations of from almost all of the candidates. Um, Bernie Sanders, we already saw what he had to say. Tom Steyer, Mr. Billionaire. Soleimani was a terrorist responsible for killing Americans. But this wasn't authorized by Congress and is an escalation that risks a wider war with Iran. Mr. Trump risks making a bad situation worse with reckless actions. So I guess as long as we weren't reckless, say okay to go after this terrorist. Elizabeth, wow, this is getting to be a broken record here. Elizabeth Warren, Soleimani was a murderer responsible for the deaths of thousands, including hundreds of Americans. But this reckless move escalates the situation with Iran and increases the likelihood of more deaths in new Middle East conflict. Our priority must be to avoid another costly war. Um, uh, so, you know, uh, same thing. Um, but the last couple here, Marianne Williamson. This isn't about whether Suleiman was a good man any more than it was about whether Saddam was a good man during the lead up to the war in Iraq. It's about smart versus stupid use of military power. Invading Iraq was criminally irresponsible, and tweets like this about Iran, um, I'm not sure whose tweet she's referring to, are from the same crowd, the same insanity. And she had a number of what I thought were very good tweets about this situation. Similarly, Andrew Yang simply said, "War with Iran is the last thing we need and is not the will of the American people. We should be acting to de-escalate tensions and protect our people in the region." So the non-establishment candidates, basically, as you might expect, Andrew Yang, Marianne Williamson, Bernie Sanders, and Tulsi Gabbard, although there were some things about her statement on Fox that I didn't agree with, but for the most part, she has taken a very strong stand against war in Iraq and Iran and elsewhere for a long time. So anyway, let's see who else had something to say here. One thing I wanted to bring up, a guy that nobody talks about. And the focus is all on the battle, as far as more progressive candidates go, between Bernie Sanders and Tulsi Gabbard, which Bernie is obviously winning right now. But there's a lot of discussion about these two candidates because they're more progressive than candidates of the Democratic Party typically fields. But Howie Hawkins is the leading contender for the Green Party's presidential nomination this time around, and I thought he had a really good statement. Hawkins says, "Stop the U.S. war on Iran, U.S. out of the Middle East now." and he mentions that tomorrow, as I'm recording this, tomorrow is Saturday, January 4th. There are demonstrations all around the United States, which hopefully will be big, um, to demand that the U.S. stop its war on Iran and that the U.S. military get out of the Middle East now. Out of Iraq, Syria, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the Persian Gulf and Indian Ocean. Well, not going to happen, obviously, but it is important to call for that, or better yet, as a T-shirt that used to be popular says, U.S. out of North America. Um, anyway, so how he goes on to say, demonstrations are planned for dozens of cities. Um, there's a website where you can look up protests near you. One here where I live is happening at noon tomorrow, and my partner and I plan to go. Demonstrations demanding U.S. troops out of Iraq and no war or no sanctions against Iraq were called earlier in the week for Saturday. The U.S. demands stop the U.S. war on Iran. With Trump's targeted assassination of the second most powerful government figure in Iran, its military leader Qassim Soulemani, I'm not sure how you say his first name, the U.S. has started a hot war with Iran. Iran is a country of 80 million people, a major military power allied with Russia and China, with whom last week Iran conducted joint naval exercises. Iran can respond asymmetrically against U.S. military deployments and American citizens anywhere in the world. But this war could well escalate into a nuclear world war. Hopefully not likely. Hopefully cooler heads will prevail here, but that is a possibility because guess who Iran's major allies are? Russia and China. Guess who has the second and third most nuclear weapons in the world? Russia and China. So this is a very dangerous situation. Saturday's demonstrations cannot be one-off. They must be the start of a sustained movement demanding that the U.S. stop its war on Iran and get its military out of the whole Middle East. He makes a good point there. This needs to be the start of a movement because the anti-war movement in this country really barely exists at this moment in time. If we're counting that much on two Congresspeople, Tulsi Gabbard and Bernie Sanders, who neither one of them have perfect records by any means on matters of war and peace, although they are pretty good in the last few years. Then we need to get off our butts and get out in the streets and organize a true mass movement. And this time, unlike with the movement against the Iraq War, but more like the one against the Vietnam War, one that sustains itself, so that maybe we won't wind up being at war for 18 years straight, like we have been right now. Pretty soon it'll be 19. So a movement must demand that the U.S. stop its war on Iran and get its military out of the whole Middle East. Given Trump's record of one-off military and diplomatic actions, and his firing of general after general in his administration, we must assume that Trump has no strategy for de-escalation and diplomacy after his assassination of Soleimani and welcomes a big war. Well, I don't know whether he welcomes a big war or not. We'll see. Hopefully not, but it certainly is true that Trump's foreign policy is chaotic for a variety of reasons. Trump may be wagging the dog to rally Americans around the flag in order to boost his support in an election year. He has never reached more than 45% favorability. Actually, I think it's hovering close to 50 right now. He faces impeachment and the prospect of a rocky general election, as well as many criminal indictments if he loses the presidency. We'll see it again. He may see war as his way out. I don't know if that'll happen or not. One can't overstate how provocative Trump's assassination is. It's as if Iran had taken out Dick Cheney during the Bush-Cheney administration. The whole Middle East sees it as this is starting a war with Iran. This is a very big deal, what Trump stupidly or evilly just did. And, and fingers crossed that cooler heads will prevail. We'll see. War will certainly serve to rally Iranians and Iraqis around their flags. In both countries, there were popular movements against inequality and corruption, but wars derail popular democratic movements. That's an excellent point that Howie's making there. In Iraq, the movement was multi-confessional, but dominated. I'm not sure what he means by multi-confessional. Dominated by Shia youth who were also demanding an end to Iranian interference in Iraqi politics. It was Shia militias under the control of Soleimani that were responsible for the deaths of hundreds of Iraqi protesters. Well, maybe that's what some other U.S. politicians are referring to, only mostly Iraqis, not Americans. Now these Iraqi youth will be joining with their government to demand the U.S. military get out now and stop making their country a battleground. Some Democrats are now condemning Trump's assassination strike, but the overwhelming majority of congressional Democrats, 188 in the House and about 40 Democrats in the Senate, just voted for the 2020 National Defense Authorization Act that told Trump he had unlimited authority to launch a war with Iran, after it deleted a bipartisan provision requiring the president to get explicit congressional authorization for military action against Iran. None of the Democratic presidential candidates is calling for the withdrawal of U.S. military forces from the whole Middle East. I think Gabbard kind of is. Anyway, the only way we are going to stop this war and end U.S. imperialism across the Middle East is with a massive and sustained movement. Come out to protest Saturday and then organize your next steps in your community, from lobbying your congressional delegation to running Greens for Congress on anti-war platforms and returning this to the streets again and again with more and more people. So I thought this was a very good statement, and I think I will end this pretty soon here. And just to kind of summarize my feelings about things, Howie is certainly right, as are other people who've made this point, that we have to rebuild a grassroots anti-war movement. There is no other way that we're going to stop this madness, or whatever other madness the so-called bipartisan consensus in our federal government conjures up. And we need to work together. We need to build a united front where people who have a wide variety of political perspectives, but who agree on the central objective of stopping the war machine, find ways to work together. And simultaneously, we can be critical of folks who, for example, say things that aren't really accurate about the person that the U.S. just assassinated, or the people that the U.S. just assassinated, or otherwise mischaracterize the situation, while at the same time saying, this is really dangerous. We shouldn't escalate this any further. You can't be going around repeating the rationale for escalation, or parts of it anyway, and really make a strong case for not escalating. So you support your local peace community, build this movement, and let's stop the war, bring the troops home, and bring the money home that we're frittering away on these wasteful and extraordinarily destructive regime change wars. Okay, that's all for this episode. Thanks for watching. Please, if you like what you saw, like and subscribe. Make some comments. Tell me what you think. And if you really liked this episode, chip in a few bucks over on Patreon. All right, thanks. I will see you soon.